Realistic watercolor painting tutorial, and this time I am painting Pink Hibiscus Bud tutorial. Let's go! An outline drawing is done. This hibiscus bud is slightly enlarged, and with an elastic eraser I'm removing the excess amount of graphite off the paper. This is quite light subject, especially around the edge lines, and we need to remove as much as possible. Also, using a white eraser, I'm removing the edge lines, which are closer to the lighter parts. From the left side we have a light source, and we need to remove as much as possible. Now let's do a color mixing. First, I will paint out colors that I think I will be using. Indian yellow, Sennelier red, permanent rose, alizarin crimson, manganese violet, sap green for the greener part, ultramarine blue also for the greener part, perylene green for some darker marks, and perylene violet for some shadow parts and some details in the main flower. Now let's do the color mixing. While I will mix, I will choose which colors of the chosen I really will use. Permanent rose together with manganese violet. We have the nice color for the base of the flower. And now permanent rose with alizarin crimson to get more warmer, adding on the side perylene violet for the darker. I'm not mixing them together, so I can pick as much as I need. Sap green with lemon yellow for the greener part, and adding ultramarine blue on the side. Also, I can pick anytime with my brush. Indian yellow and also a little bit of lemon yellow. Now we can start painting process. In one hand I have round synthetic brush, in other hand I have paper towel. I'm using paper towel all the time, and be sure that your water is clean after mixing watercolors. Starting with one section, we can see in the reference that there are several petals. They are curved around each other, and I'm starting with one petal that I see. I'm opening a reference right beside the tutorial, or you can open on another device, on the phone, on the computer. I'm not placing reference in the tutorial itself because we can't really go into detailing. When I have my reference right beside me, I really zoom in the beginning stages, the area that I'm working on, so I'm really understand what is going on. Now I applied water layer, very thin amount, and very transparent amount of permanent rose together with manganese violet. With clean and dry brush, I wipe out the area that I see on the reference that there is the light shiny part. By dipping brush in the water, cleaning it paper towel, and lifting watercolors of the paper. Moving to the next one. Again, as you can see, I'm loading brush with very small amount of watercolors, like super transparent. We need first layer very transparent in order to control intensity, to control our tonal values, and also what is very important, after first layer we will erase the rest of the graphite marks. We don't want them to shine through watercolor layers. Watercolor layers are transparent, and especially with lighter subject, graphite marks are super visible. And after they stay visible with the finished painting, the painting looks kind of dirty. Even you can have a super beautifully painted painting, but if the graphite marks lines will be visible, it can ruin the whole impression of your painting. Moving forward, taking a smaller finer tip brush, because I'm moving to the smaller section. Even this bud is enlarged, there are still small sections, and I'm more in control when I'm using a finer tip brush. Loading brush with watercolors. If there is too much pigment or too much water, I can easily lift out with the same brush and dry it in paper towel. I always have paper towel in my left hand. It's like never leaving the whole tutorial painting process. All the time, drying brush of some excess amount of water or too much pigment if I have on my brush. It's better in the beginning to paint light, then slowly increase the saturation. Again, I'm wiping out some marks that I see in reference. There's this interesting texture for this area where there are lighter marks and slightly visible petal veins. Moving forward to the next one, still using also finer tip brush. Be careful, don't go out of the edges. And I'm loading my brush with small amount of watercolors. Here slightly darker because I can see in the reference that this area is in the shadow. Here, this painting asks a lot of little brush strokes. There are lots of little things going on in this painting. So be very patiently painting this hibiscus bud. Don't rush things, don't go too dark. You will finish up with flat looking painting. If you will go transparently, it's better to add extra layer rather than don't know what to do with all the darkness. In first layer, we are establishing color tones and light and shadow so that we are keeping light light. Even I'm always keeping light much bigger space than it looks in the reference, because after a few layers it will become smaller and smaller. Again, as you can see, I'm lifting watercolors from the paper. With clean and dry brush, I can do that really easily. Moving forward, I'm covering all the area of each petal. I'm not leaving any special place for the veins that we see in the reference. It is all done with lifting and managing that later on with layers of darker or lighter watercolors. Now I'm not too concerned about those veins that we see on the bottom part of this bud. They're super beautiful. They're making this subject look that it is a hibiscus. The hibiscus has a very intense petal veins. But this is not the moment to worry about those veins. Also, I will show in this painting how I paint main veins, but those little secondary veins we will create with some uneven brush strokes. We will create the illusion of those veins. Now I'm lifting the main veins that we see. I'm dipping my brush in water, cleaning in paper towel, and lifting the vein. With finer tip brush, the lifted area will be finer. And as you can see, I'm repeating process until I have a visibility that there are veins lifted from the surface of the paper. And while the surface is moist, you can easily do that. Don't wait for the surface to be completely dry and then try to lift. No, it will not work that way. There are different methods how to do that, but not the best ones. It's better to do that while the area is still a little bit moist. applying a little bit darker details that we see in the reference. I'm constantly looking at reference. I also suggest you don't just assume, don't paint from your imagination. We can't paint realistic painting from our imagination. Our imagination can't be so rich as the real subjects are, and references can show us everything that we need. Good quality photos in perfect lighting, in right daylight, will do everything and show everything that we need for painting. Now let's paint also the first layer for the greener part, applying water, very small amount, just for the area to be moist. And I'm taking sap green with lemon yellow, and transparently, everything is super transparent at this point. We don't need to rush things with darker layers. Carefully with the brush, don't go over the edges. We don't need any green color on our pink bud. Looking at reference, there are these bigger leaves, and then there's smaller leaves, and then there's a stem, and we need to establish what is darker, what is lighter. Really zoom in that area of the reference and look and study. Pause the video, take a good look at the reference, try to analyze, ask yourself these questions: which is darker, which is lighter, which color tones you see. A little bit closer view for this upper part painting. Stem, applying water, and also transparent amount of watercolors. Study from the reference that little leaf and see tonal changes in that little leaf. The edges on the right are slightly darker, middle part is also slightly darker. In order to create a realistic looking subject, we need to look for those little details. Not the general things make a realistic painting realistic. It's all about in the details, those little transitions, that some small little flaws or little details that stuck somewhere. Everything creates a realistic painting, not the major things. With the very tip of the brush, painting those tiny leaves. And now I waited for several minutes for the painting to be completely dry. It's super important after first layer to wait that you are like 200% sure that the painting is dry, and then you can erase, because if it will be a little bit moist, you will damage the paper very easily. Also, don't push too hard when you are erasing. Use the bigger brush to remove some dust, some unnecessary things. I also have a very nice lesson about transferring and how to protect your painting. Check those links in the caption about protecting your watercolor painting, protecting your paper, and how to transfer line drawing. Very carefully erasing as much as possible, but doing it very lightly, very accurately. Moving forward with the bud. This is the time when many of my students are asking, I don't know how to move forward. I'm completely okay with the first layer. I do it very nicely, but then I feel stuck. What to do next? How I can approach my painting so I'm not ruining it. My suggestion and what I do, I always start from the darker area. There I feel somehow more confident, and with tiny brush strokes, still with transparent amount of watercolors, not so watery anymore as it was in the first layer, but I'm slowly starting to build from the shadow area towards the lightest part. And as I start painting, as I start doing, just all things start to come up and start to flow, because you already are in the motion in the painting process. Don't be afraid of this stage. If you are painting transparently, there's no need to be afraid. You can add layers and layers. There's only a problem if you are approaching your painting with very dark and saturated watercolors. I'm painting with professional pigments, and as you can see, I don't need a lot of pigment to get this vibrancy of my watercolor mixes. I really use super small amount of pigment in order to make very realistic saturated paintings. But the key is to paint transparently. You are more in control. The realistic subject with watercolors only appears by layering and tonal values. You can't use too dark saturated watercolor mixes. It will only make the painting look flat. You need to keep light. You need to work on tonal values and work accurately and patiently. I know that many beginners are struggling, that after a few layers they say they don't see nothing similar to the reference, and I'm just telling you, you just have been started. Don't expect the painting to look realistic after a few layers. You need more work, more layers, more patience, and the best thing is to enjoy the process. If you are for fast results, this is not the medium, this is not the technique, and this is not the style. Realistic painting asks for patience and time. Now I start to add watercolors, still constantly checking the reference and leaving out the main veins of the petals. First, if we look carefully at the reference, we will notice that each main vein, which is the bigger ones on these petals, have a shadow area underneath. So I'm very lightly underpainting each main vein with the shadow. Now with the tip of the brush, we can see in that area that I'm painting right now is the darker area where two petals are meeting, and there's creating a shadow line. In realistic painting, it's more about not the technique, but observation skills. The more we look in the reference, the more we start to see. Loading my brush again with watercolors and carefully doing that upper part of this petal with little brush strokes from the shadow area, with tiny brush strokes going to the lighter area. Constantly my eyes are going from the reference to the painting. Loading my brush with small amount of Indian yellow and lemon yellow mix, adding on in one spot yellow, because I can see in the reference there is some little notions of yellow color. Pause the video, take a look at this area. Do you see that color there? Just try to look more deeper into the painting, zoom in into the reference and try to find this color. Do you see that? checking if the surface is dry and adding another layer of watercolors. There we have a nice cast shadow on the petal from the leaf, which is right above that area. And with tiny brush strokes, I'm leaving area in the middle where those petal veins and light area is. And very careful with the outer edge line. We don't want to look it fluffy. There is the visible strict line of the edge. Carefully. This petal is very beautifully curved and creating those visible petal veins. They're like ribs, and we are painting with the tip of the brush very transparently. We don't want to lose that light area, but still we need to show those curved petal veins. More darkness, building gradually, transparently, and as I apply layers gradually and transparently, it becomes more saturated, more darker, more vivid. Some areas start to look more realistic. We start to see appearing some volume, and I'm using watercolors that we pre-mixed. Main is Permanent Rose with Manganese Violet, and the other one we have Permanent Rose, Alizarin Crimson, and Perylene Violet. Slowly moving forward, section by section, brushstroke by brushstroke, adding uneven brush strokes to this area. We can see in the left side, closer to the middle from the left, there's the darker area in the reference. Pause the video and take a look at the reference. Do you see that there is on the left edge light, then there is a shadow area, then again lighter area, and again a shadow area. So we need to see these tonal changes in order to create a realistic subject. Still constantly checking reference. Even painting for days, weeks, I will still be looking in the reference. Don't assume something and then just paint. We don't need to do that. We have everything. And now I'm showing you how I hold my brush in order to make those uneven brush strokes. Water amount is very, very small, and with the side of the brush I'm going over the surface and creating this texture that we see in the reference, this uneven look. In the reference, those are secondary, lots of little secondary veins. We will not be painting them so detailed because it will take a lot of time, and it's not a matter of tutorial, one hour tutorial. So I'm creating this texture which looks like these secondary veins. Moving forward, as you can see how much watercolors I have used from my color palette. Not so much, and that is one of the reasons it's so nice to have professional pigments. They last for a really long time, and you don't need to make big amount of watercolor mixes in order that you can mix one time and that will be enough. It's not a bad thing if the watercolor mixes finish and you add the same colors that you did previously. Maybe the tone will be slightly different, but that's okay. It is nice to have different tones in one painting. It will only make the painting look realistic. Painting gradually, moving forward gradually. My painting is far away from the saturation of the reference, but I'm trusting the process, believing in the technique, and I know that everything will work fine because I'm working gradually, transparently, and building my subject slowly in order to control what I'm doing, to make detailed painting. As you can see, I'm painting under each main petal vein, and they slowly start to appear. Those veins slowly start to be more visible, more intense, just because I'm adding shadow underneath them. I'm not using white paint, I'm not using masking fluid. I'm doing everything with the contrast, with the tip of the brush, adding darker details on the very bottom part of this bud, with the very tip of the brush, carefully, and using the same watercolors that we have on our color palette. Another layer of transparent watercolors, and as you can see, it slowly starts to get darker. It's not about the intensity of the watercolors, it's the amount of layers. I'm not going darker with watercolors. Another extra layer gives darkness of the same amount of watercolors. That's the beauty of watercolors. You can layer and make it darker and darker and darker. With oil paints, for example, you can place red on red, the same red. It will not appear darker because the oil paints are opaque and they are not layering. Yes, there are transparent also oil paints. That is slightly different story, but like watercolors, you can really layer and that area will become darker and darker and more intense. That's why we need layering. This is how we are building that vibrancy, that richness of our paintings with layers. Now let's work on the greener part. I know for many of you, greener parts are more challenging, and I notice quite often that little green parts like this one, for example, is done very fast, very quickly with just few brush strokes, and main attention goes to the bud, to the flower. That is wrong. That is a mistake. A beautifully painted flower can be ruined with a poorly painted stem or little leaf beside it. You need to pay as much attention as you do for the main thing that you think is the main thing, because everything in one composition is the main thing, and you need to pay as much attention for those little things. They help. They are little helpers to make this painting look realistic. Now, with careful studies of the references, I'm moving forward using sap green, lemon yellow, and ultramarine blue. They're not completely mixed together. They're separately on my color palette, so I'm more in control when I need more greener, more yellowish green mix. I'm going more to the lemon yellow side. When I need a cooler green mix, I move more to the ultramarine blue side. I'm more in control of my watercolor mixes when I have all those pigments not completely separate and not completely mixed together. Again, washing my synthetic brush and smoothing some applied watercolor layer that I have. With this tutorial, I'm not going too much with the smoothing because there are so many textured surfaces visible, and we don't want to have a very smooth painting because it doesn't look quite smooth in the reference. Petals are super textured, also the green parts are with texture, and I'm not going too much with round synthetic brush. Really working with the finer tip brush, those little details, those little green parts. Each of that green part helps us build realistic painting. Everything is important. Pay as much attention, paint transparently, gradually, study the reference, and work slowly. You don't need to rush. You are here to learn, to get new knowledge, practice, constantly checking reference. And I'm comparing one petal with another, one leaf with another, checking this side. It's more open to the light source. It means that this part of the green area is lighter rather than that on the right side. Adding a little bit darkness on the right of the middle leaf. We see in the reference that there is some darkness, and we can see that only by comparing and adding darker brush strokes in the middle part of that leaf, because there's the little curve. The greener part on the upper side is curved in the middle and goes on the bud, creating this little transition of darker color. That's what I'm painting right now, that middle part of the green leaf in the middle. There's slightly darker color, and then there's darker part underneath the upper leaf. So as you can see, I'm painting very much attention on the small things. Pause the video and check it. Really zoom in the reference and try to see these little changes. It's not just green area, green spot. There's so many things going on, and we need to show them. Now leaving a little bit those leaves to rest, to paper completely dry, and moving to the stem. Stem also needs work, also needs your attention in order for this painting to work. In the middle, there's the separation part where two parts of the stem connect. That is a little bit darker. And adding in the middle the shadow line, leaving left sides like 1 millimeter of the edge completely light. We see in the reference that there is the light area. Carefully. Also, a little tip, my suggestion, it's important to have fine, thin stems. In order to do that, what I do, I know that I tend to go over the edges. When I'm transferring my line drawing, I'm making those stems slightly thinner than they appear in the reference, because I know that I will go over the edge and I have that little gap to go over the edge, and I'm more relaxed. Even if I will slightly go over the edge, I have that little gap. If you know that also your hand isn't so steady, make those stems thinner. It's better than they are thinner rather than thicker. When we have a beautiful painting or leaf or flower and then there's a thick stem, it doesn't look realistic, it doesn't look nice. So better to draw them in the first place much thinner. Adding another layer of transparent watercolors to the greener part. Those little secondary leaves are lighter. Keep that in mind. Check the reference, see that the stem and bigger green leaves are in one color, more yellowish, and those little ones that are like little spikes and sticking out, they are a little bit lighter and appear cooler green. Getting back to the bud and moving forward with finer brush strokes, transparent layers, we're painting further. Building layers, checking reference, noticing, comparing. I can still see that I'm far away from the vibrancy and saturation of the reference, but I'm not worried. I'm painting for almost an hour and I just need to continue the same. I see that I'm slowly building the layers and building the saturation. I just need to continue. No rush. Don't rush things up with going darker. It will not help. Learn patience. Learn to enjoy the process. If you feel tired and feel the urge to rush things up, take a pause. The beauty of tutorial painting after the tutorial, you can pause at any time, come back relaxed with a fresh look, and continue the slow process. This is like some kind of art meditation, and when I'm really going into the process, I forget about everything. And when I start to think about, oh, I need to hurry up, rush things, I better stop. I'm not filming these tutorials in one take. No. I also making pauses. I'm going for a tea, for a walk, or maybe answer some emails in the middle, or go after my kids. I take those little breaks in order to work as much accurate as possible and not to ruin the painting. Moving forward, as you can see from my color palette how many watercolors I have used, not so many, and I haven't added also a new color or a new amount of watercolors. I'm still doing the same approach, painting slowly, adding layers, and the watercolors that have been used is a very small amount. Now let's work on this area, taking a closer look and starting with adding those little lanterns of Indian yellow, little tips of brush on the paper. You don't need to completely make the same place for each lantern as it is in reference, but also don't make it super even on both sides. Paint some differences. In one side there are more, in other side there are less. Those little dots. Get the idea of those little lanterns and apply them with the very tip of the brush. They're super small. And now I'm loading my brush with the main color and very light amount, which is permanent rose with manganese violet, and making very super fine lines that are stamens to those lanterns. So each of your dot is a little lantern, and you need to have a little stamen to each that lantern. Also, closer to the bud, those stamens and lanterns are a little bit darker because they go into the bud and they are in the shadow, and closer to the outer part they're lighter. Paint with the finest brush, with the very tip of the brush, again slowly. If you're not too sure about your fine lines, practice on a different paper. And also what helps, don't load brush with too lot of pigment and water. That way you will have a very thick lines even with the finest brush. Load your brush with quite dry amount of watercolor mixes. Remove some excess amount on the paper towel and then go to your painting. Maybe you will add only a few lines, but still they will be thin. If you will load your brush with a lot of watercolors, then those lines will be thick. Now I can see that I have a lot of very light areas on my bud, so I'm taking round synthetic brush, a super small amount of manganese violet with permanent rose, and going over the shadow parts, which is on the right of this bud. If we compare right side to the left side, we will notice that the right side is away from the light source and is in the shadow. That's why we need to paint that area slightly darker. And to do that, I'm going, as you can see, over the whole area with the round synthetic brush. I'm not worried about painting over details. Again, I'm doing it very transparently and my tonal values are in places. That's why I spent an hour to paint those little details. So now I can go over with the round synthetic brush and not worry that I will lose something. That, for example, that big thick petal vein which starts from the right and goes to the left side will have right tonal values even if I go over that, because I'm going over the right side, which is on the right, and we need there that vein slightly darker, and I'm leaving it light on the left side. So we have with one brush stroke gradual transitions from the darker to the lighter. but it's only possible after spending so much time in building right tonal values, building right contrast between light and dark, painting those details. And as you can see now, with more freer brush strokes, I'm approaching the result of gradual transitions from the shadow on the right side to the light area on the left side. Getting back to the finer tip brush and moving forward again with building details, building layers. Still nothing is changed. I can see, compared to the reference, that my bud needs more work, more details, and more contrast. Now I'm loading my finer tip brush with a little bit more saturated watercolor amount, and I'm doing little uneven brush strokes in between those veins. Take a really careful look. What am I doing? And this is, I'm creating those little areas that look like secondary veins, but I'm not painting like each vein separately. With little uneven brush strokes and contrast of a darker color, I'm making that area the texture that is visible in the reference. But again, you need to do that very accurately with the very tip of the brush. Those areas are super small, and my brush strokes are also very thin with the very tip of the brush. Don't rush here, move slowly and accurately, taking more of Perlin Violet, also building contrast more on the lower part under the main petal veins, adding some shadow lines that we see. And as more I look in the reference, I start to see more some details, some shadow, some curved areas. And now with the very tip of the brush, I'm creating those uneven lines and curves. Now I'm going more into detailing. I have the nice background color. I have worked on it for an hour, and now I can go into detailing. The interesting thing first that got our attention in the subject that we are thinking about painting are the details. But in the painting process, the details are almost all the time the last thing that we are doing. Main time has been spent on building a nice background color on which those details will be applied, painted. I'm taking my color palette and permanent rose, clean permanent rose. I can see from the reference that there are some areas that are more pinkish than my painting looks. The very right side, then the middle part has a vibrant pink color. And permanent rose, or you can use opera rose, definitely you have some vibrant pink color in your color palette. So now is the time to add those very vibrant pink layers. Don't do that on the whole area. Take a look at the reference really carefully and see that there are some areas super vibrant pink, but not all the area is super vibrant pink. There are lots of violets that we were adding, lighter pinks. Adding more contrast. Now's the time when I really enjoy painting process. I can see the end result. I can see that I did quite good. I trusted the process, I enjoyed the process, and everything is working just the way it should, and it's very going the same as the reference. Applying a little bit more of permanent rose to my color palette, comparing right side to the left side, and I can see that I need more darkness, more contrast to the right side. And now my reference is zoomed out, and I'm looking at the whole bud, not each detail, and I'm comparing one side to another, one petal to another. That way that we have gradual transitions, contrast, something is further, something is closer, and we are controlling that with the contrast of darkness and lightness. Adding Indian yellow to some areas of the pink color on top of the pink layer, and it gives a very nice touch, super vibrancy, and our bud is in a beautiful movement right now. Perlin violet, little touches of perlin violet for some more contrasty shadow parts. getting back to the green part, adding perlin green to the green mix, and we have a very fine lines on those green leaves that are darker. Those are green veins, and we have them darker than the main color of the leaf, of that little leaf. Doing with the tip of the brush, very accurately, very carefully. Even if the finishing part is very close, we don't need to rush things now. Like, this is the fun part of the painting process, at least for me, and I could spend hours in this stage because we're like making this painting more and more beautiful, more and more vibrant, more and more realistic. So don't rush things, really enjoy this stage. You've done it so good. Of course you can finish anytime, this is your painting. You can decide when to stop, but also you can push yourself a little bit more, a little bit further, see how many more layers you can add, how many details you can add. This is the time that we can push ourselves a little bit further. I'm loading my brush with a little bit of pink color mix and adding that on the little spot on the leaf. I can see from the reference that maybe some part of the bud is shining through that green part and giving that little pinkish violetish color on the green leaf part. Adding final details to this painting. I'm already painting more than an hour, and for the tutorial this is very enough, and for the starting of learning realistic watercolor painting this is also, you have a lot of information. This is your choice, that you can go a little bit more into details, into more layers. I enjoyed painting this hibiscus bud. Really nice time, learned a lot. Hope you also learned something new, and I'm really grateful that you are here. Thank you for watching, thank you for painting with me, and see you in my next tutorials. Bye bye.